Okay, well, good morning. It's Bible study time again. We're here in Sunday school at Calvary Baptist Church, and I want to invite you to be a part of our time here. We're going to study out of the same unit where we've been for a couple of Sundays. And so today we get to the session 3. We've been talking about the pitfalls of life, and we've been using the Old Testament patriarch. I would call Joseph part of a patriarch. We think of the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Joseph was still a part of that in my mind because he was one of the 12 sons of Israel or of Jacob, and he also was his tribe or his clan as well. Ephraim and Manasseh, his two sons, were given an inheritance in the promised land when they came out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses. So just passing that along there to you. The life of Joseph is one of pitfalls, and if there was ever anyone who could sing, if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all, it would have been Joseph, because in his lifetime he had that kind of thing happening. But yet the Bible reminds us the reason for his success was not because he got defeated or because he allowed his circumstance to defeat him, but because God was with him, and he never lost sight of the presence of God. He never lost touch with the fact that God was with him. So we go now to the next phase of his life. He finds himself in prison. Of course, we looked 2 weeks ago. His brother sold him into slavery. Then last week, he ended up in Egypt. He was bought by a man named Potiphar, who was so the scripture tells us, captain of the guard. We think he was probably over all the prisons or the jails or all those people who were under the thumb of Pharaoh, and so he oversaw those things. He may have even overseen some other things of the palace or other things with Pharaoh. We don't totally know what that means, but we do know that he was in charge of so many things, and Joseph, as his servant, rose to the top, and Potiphar put him over everyone in his house except his wife, and his wife became lustful, and she desired him, and so she tried to tempt him or seduce him. He didn't have anything to do with it because he knew that it would be a sin against God. And so what happened? She caught him one day. Nobody else was in the house for a witness. She grabbed a hold of him and tried to take his clothes off. The only way for him to escape was basically without his coat or his cloak and his clothes. And he got out of there, as they say, by the skin of his teeth, or maybe the skin of his loincloth. I don't know. But he got out of there, and then she held it against him and said that he had approached her rather than being the other way around. Well, Potiphar was angry. He was mad. And so as we read today, he came along and put Joseph in prison. And, he was the captain of the guard. That means that he was over the prison. So we don't really know what happened out of this, but we'll talk about it as we go through and as we read the scripture. Sometimes the challenges of life have a way of just beating us down, and it can defeat us if we let it. But if we'll remember that God is with us, then we can have victory. And even though the world's may be closing in on all sides, we can know that God is with us and he is near us, and that we have his presence to depend upon, and he promises he'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. And because of that, when we trust in him, we can be assured that all will be well. Through justice, and of course this title of this lesson is The Pitfall of Injustice. And we might look and say, well, that wasn't fair for Joseph. Well, life isn't fair, is it? I've used this illustration several times when I was a boy, and I was in the marching band, and I was a right guard, which meant I could keep in step halfway, which meant everybody on down my line had to march in step with me, and they wouldn't do it. And I said to Brent Elliott, who's now circuit judge out east here toward Livingston County, is where he served most of his time. And I said to Brent Elliott, they won't follow me. And he got right in my face and he looked at me and he said, "Toughy wuffy." So, that's the way life is, isn't it? Sometimes it's toughy wuffy. And sometimes we just have to deal with it and work through that. Well, that's the way it was with Joseph. And he could have been defeated. He could have gotten down. He could have really complained and whined about it and let God know how he felt. But instead, he knew God was faithful. And he knew if he was obedient to God, that God would take care of the situation. And really, he was like the psalmist so often is when we read through the Psalms. And that's what we're doing in January Bible study this season. When you read through the Psalms, then you realize the psalmist knew if God was with him, everything was okay. As long as he had God's presence, he was all right. And even in the wilderness, God, his presence made all the difference in the world. So Joseph was aware of that. And it doesn't matter how many times we get knocked down, how many times do we get up? And that's what makes the difference, isn't it? So the Bible promises God will be with us. We can stand on that promise for sure. So let's begin. Genesis 39, we're going to look at verses 21 through 23 first. And I don't really like the way this does it. So if you have a Bible in your lap, or if you have one in reach, when we're done with this video, you may want to go back and pick it up and read the verses in between. Or you might even want to, you can push pause and it'll stop for a little bit. Then you can read these verses in between. I'm going to summarize them as we go. And hopefully that'll be a good filler for us. But we also need to know that God's word is faithful and true. Go ahead and read it. Go back and read it and know what it says. Well, Genesis 39, beginning verse 21. The word, excuse me. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority. God is with him, isn't he? And he was responsible for everything that was done there. Isn't that just telling of Joseph's leadership ability and his character, that he was able to rise to the top wherever he was. And I think that's true when we put our trust in God, that when the potential is there, we will rise to the top. Did Potiphar tell the warden of the prison, hey, that Joseph's really good character, he's trustworthy? Maybe he got a hint, or maybe he just after a short period of time realized Joseph was accountable and Joseph was good. We don't know, but we do know that the Lord was with him, and that makes all the difference. Verse 23, the warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. So, whatever you're doing, even if injustice comes your way, you just keep doing what you know is right. And don't say, well, if that's what it's going to be, I'm going to just do this. I've heard so many people say that they thought they were smarter than God. And when God didn't make things happen the way they thought they should, then they turned around and said, well, then I'm going to do it my way. And yeah, God will bless that, right? Yeah, he'll honor that. Sure. No, you still have to say, God, your way is the right way, and I need to trust in your way. So Potiphar was furious, had Joseph put in jail, and but the Lord was with Joseph. And some commentators said that just the fact that he didn't have him put to death, maybe he did believe Joseph's story a little bit. Maybe he doubted his wife's story a little bit. Or maybe he just knew that Joseph had so much great potential that this was a forgivable or a pardonable in his life. So the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord extended his kindness to Joseph. It tells us that word kindness in Hebrew Um, uh, denotes faithfulness, grace, loyalty, love, and even just goodness, and more. It comes in a context um, the same as what we read in Psalm 136 when it talks about God's faithful love for us. People had treated Joseph unjustly, but God's kindness had the power to override the injustice and the human failure that had happened. With God's help, Joseph had risen to a leadership role in Potiphar's house, and now, with the kindness or the unending love of God, he had risen to a position of leadership, even in the prison. So wherever he was, God granted him favor, didn't he? And you might not know what God is doing, or you might not know how God is going to work it out, but don't give up. Paul said in the New Testament that when he went through his experience that he called the thorn in the flesh, and he suffered through that, the lesson he learned was not to get mad at God and blame God or tell God he did it wrong. Uh, but his lesson out of that was that God's grace is sufficient no matter what we go through. And I believe that's what Joseph learned. I believe that's what we are to learn when we look at this lesson of the injustice and how it affects us in our lives. So the warden, by the way, he probably reported to Potiphar, and I even kind of think in my mind, Potiphar might have even been wondering, how's that kid doing? How's everything going down there in prison? He couldn't do anything to get him out, but he could at least know what was going on with him. So Joseph then became responsible for everything that was done there. Uh, the warden didn't bother, or he didn't look in on, or he didn't oversee, or he wasn't, looking over his shoulder, over his back, wondering what's he doing. He was just let Joseph handle it. He just trusted him to take care of it. It's a parallel statement to what Potiphar had done in his house with Joseph. And why was he able to do that? Because the Bible tells us the Lord was with him. And that's the key, isn't it? So the Lord made everything that he did successful, it tells us. Not only was God with him, but God made it successful. And that is a similar word to Psalm 1, where it talks about in verse 3 that, blessed is the man. I don't know if you watched the sermon video in worship 2 weeks ago, but we looked at Psalm 1, and blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, but his delight is in the Lord. And then in verse 3, it talks about how it makes him blessed, or how God blesses him because he turns away from evil. And so that's that same word. He makes him successful. God blesses him. God has poured out benefit on him simply because he has done what is right. He prospers. Okay? So those are just some good reminders to us that God's presence makes all the difference in our lives. And his hand upon us, and that's doing what we know is right, leads to blessing, prosperity, so to speak. And then we skip a few verses, and we go to Genesis 40 and verses 4 through 8. And we'll read this, and then I'll try to summarize a little and fill in the gaps for you. So it says in verse 4, the captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. Who's they? Well, if you read the verses in between, you'll realize that there were two people who were in the king's court. There was the chief cupbearer, and there was the chief baker. And something happened, and the two of them found them in jail with Joseph. Now, this kind of goes ahead and tells us the level of this jail, where these two prominent people would be kept. Joseph wasn't just thrown out with, all the bad people. He was in a jail where um, bad people were there, but they were prominent people who were there. Um, it wasn't like he was thrown in a pit or in solitary confinement or who knows what. And so two people were there. There's some scholars who say that it's possible that this was a changing of the guard, that maybe a new Pharaoh was coming on. Maybe the old Pharaoh had died, or maybe the old Pharaoh was stepping down for his son. We don't really know what's going on here. We don't have the facts to figure it out. But uh, those things are possible, I guess. But anyway. Well, if you are doing that, then you want to make sure that you have the right people in your cabinet or in your household that are going to treat you right and take care of you and do whatever. And so if you're a new guy coming in, those two things are important. What you drink, you want to make sure it's not poison. And what you eat, you want to make sure it's healthy and good and not going to make you sick or make you die. And so those are two prominent people, and it's possible making a changing of the guard, especially when it comes down to, as we're going to read here in a little bit, that Pharaoh, this was all happening on his birthday. So let's read on. Genesis 40, verse 5, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker who were confined in the prison each had a dream. So here's this baker, here's this cupbearer, and one night they both had a dream. And so they were kind of thinking about the dreams and wondering what they meant. And each had its own, both had a dream on the same night, and each had its own meaning, it says. And so in verse 6, when Joseph came to them in the morning, that is, he went to serve them, or he went to care for them, or to oversee their needs. He saw that they looked distraught. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house, why do you look so sad today? Verse 8 says, we had dreams, they said to him, but there's no one to interpret them. And then Joseph said to them, don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. It's quite possible, because in those days people dreamed dreams, and they did have meaning and they did have understanding. And so you needed to know what they meant. It's more than possible Pharaoh had a group of dream interpreters or magicians or someone. We know when Moses comes back later on to deliver God's people, that there was a group of not magicians, sorry, I get that right, in Pharaoh's court. And so were they divinators? Did they work on divination? Did they work on magic? Possibly. So if you came to these people and asked them what a dream meant, they would confer, and then they would tell you what they believed that meant. But here they were in prison, here they were in jail. They'd had that luxury before. They didn't have it now. So they said, there's no one to tell us what it means. And so Joseph said, well, dreams belong to God. Interpretations belong to God. So he said, tell me the dreams. So what happened? They had their dreams, and they began to tell him what they meant. And was Joseph in, can we say it was just by chance he was in the right place at the right time? I don't think so, because the providence of God always puts you where God wants you to be. And he always puts you in the place where you need to be in order to serve him. We don't always know that. We don't always understand that. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out the right place, Man, there's been times when I felt like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And how do I get out of there? You maybe felt that way before too. But yet, when we trust in God, we always have to trust that we're where he wants us to be. Joseph didn't let his circumstance tear him down. He still kept pointing people to God, and he said to them, interpretations of dreams, they belong to God. So then we go to the next passage, chapter 40, verses 20 to 23. And in between, they told him their dreams, and he interpreted the dreams. You'll want to read those verses to make sure that you understand what they mean. So Joseph said to them, "On 3 days, you're going to be taken out. You're going to be brought up, and on those days, the cupbearer, he's going to be restored to his position, and the baker is going to be." The old King James used the word hung. Their version of hanging was they put a sharp stick and ran it through you, and they impaled you. Sometimes they ran it up this way, sometimes they ran it through this way, and then they put the stick in the ground, and then you were just left there to die. And the dream was that the birds were going to come and eat his body, eat his carcass. And sure enough, that's what happened to him. So we begin at verse 20 then, next passage, last passage. And by the way, it reminds us to not be discouraged by the delays of life. Sometimes life doesn't happen as fast as we want it. Our patience is often tested, isn't it? Well, it says on the third day of his birthday, here again, what was the feast all about? What was going on? Was a new Pharaoh stepping in, and this was the day? They marked it by his birthday so they'd always remember his first day in office. Sometimes they did that. So he gave a feast for all his servants. He elevated the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. So in other words, he brought them out of prison. He elevated them, means he just brought them out and put them back on the same level plane with all his servants. And if he's a new Pharaoh coming in, he's possibly, saying, "Here's my new cabinet. Here's who I'm putting in here." So he brought them all up for the feast, for the party. Verse 21, Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And I think you know how important that was, that the cupbearer protect what Pharaoh drank, so that you had to have someone that you could trust. But in verse 22, but Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had explained to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And so when Joseph interpreted the dreams, he said to them, "Remember me when you get out of here. Remember, I was the one, but it says he didn't remember. Now, that word remember, does it just mean he totally forgot? Well, not always. That word doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it means that when he got out of there, he didn't have the opportunity to say, "Oh, by the way, the guy that interpreted my dream, he's still back there in prison. He's probably better than or greater than all of us. He doesn't deserve to be there." He didn't have the opportunity. Is probably what it means more than anything. I'm sure he never forgot the dream, especially when it came true, just as we could say Joseph interpreted, but just as God interpreted. Because I know that Joseph wasn't depending on his own mind to interpret the dreams. He was depending on God, because he said, "Don't interpretations of dreams belong to God." So it happened just the way that Joseph had said. But don't be discouraged by delays, because God's timing is always perfect, isn't it? Timing is always right, and we can trust in his timing, even though in our human frailty we are very impatient. God still knows what's best. Well, any thoughts in your heart, in your mind, as we wrap up today? Just a couple of things from the Teaching Quarterly, the teaching book that I was going to throw out here for us. First one, turn to the right page. First one is, we often talk about, when we get to the end of it, we talk about praying, but we cannot emphasize or stress praying enough. Pray for patience. Pray that even though you may feel like you've been mistreated or abused or betrayed, as we saw in the first week by Joseph's brothers, and the injustice abounds around you, continue to trust God. Pay attention to the situations where you tend to lose your patience, and just ask God for strength and help to not see the moment, but to hopefully see the big picture as God sees it. We just have to depend on him. So pray for that. And then write a verse on a post-it note or someplace and stick it around you. You might want to write um, the verse that Joseph, one of the verses he said through this. Don't interpretations belong to God? Well, I think that's just not only in dreams, but I think that's in the way things play out in life. I think that if God is the God of all things and the God of all the universe, then the way things go in life, he has a hand in that. And so it all belongs to him. We belong to him. He has uh, the authority over us, over all things. And so we need to depend on him and trust in him through that. And then, go back and read those verses. Go back and read some other things about that we didn't fill in. Make sure you get that and make sure you fill that in. And depend upon God and his presence this week. Ask God to help you to do that. Well, okay. Bye-bye.